So, first question.
Hello, I'm Abdullah. And is it one?
Yes, let's stand up, please. The mic. Thank you.
Okay. I have a question about the BDS movement. So,
boycott, divestment, sanctions.
And what has the effect of this been in at Israel itself? So, is there like an economic effect, and is Israel having like a bad influence of this or something? Could you tell me more?
Thank you. So the question is, what is the effect of BDS in Israel itself?
Well, the PDS movement, boycott, divestment, sanctions, is a movement of 700 Palestinian civil society organizations that called for the world community to be in solidarity with them. And so far, the response has been very positive in many places around the world. Some places less successful than others. And increasingly we're seeing that Israel is attempting to respond by trying to criminalize or to create legislation that would restrict the ability of organizers to work on the PDS movement. Just taking the fact that Israel is actually trying to legislate and stop this, meaning that there's some effect that Israel is having. Now, I want to remind you that in PDS work, similar to the South Africa work, you are not going to try to end all economic or commercial transactions. What you're trying is to effect the margin of profit and the margin of possible investments that are taking place that will motivate other companies to think that this is not a good place for continuation of economic activity and behavior. Activists should not be thinking that I am going to end all economic activity taking place. That's just not tenable. And sometimes you'll find PDS websites that have 2,000 products and saying boycott this, and it's like, I can't do this. And therefore there is strategic boycotts that are occurring. For the South Africa apartheid, we actually targeted Coca-Cola at the time. Now, Coca-Cola, if you think about their economic, what you call pot of money, maybe it was about 200 million in South Africa. It's big, but it's not substantial like big companies. But we felt, one, is that it had high visibility in all the college campuses, because all the college campuses have Coca-Cola machines, the athletic fields had Coca-Cola banners, so there's high contact with individuals. Second, they had contracts that are negotiable in every few years. Sometimes 3 or 5 years they have to come back and negotiate. So now you have a leverage of decision makers that have to make a decision over the contract. So that was an important. Third, you had an alternative in the market. Pepsi was an alternative. Pepsi was not in South Africa. Coca-Cola was in South Africa. So those three made Coca-Cola the most attuned target for the boycott movement, because we could leverage all of our resources on college campuses in order to problematize the Coca-Cola and create context. So now you have a Coca-Cola machine in the student union, you have a picket line of students handing out leaflets about the Coca-Cola. So the university is not going to come and arrest students in there where like 2,000 students are passing. So it created an immediate place for that engagement. And few years when the contracts were coming out, Pepsi began to put on their proposals, we're socially responsible, we're not in South Africa. What happened is that Pepsi became our advertiser. That's when you know that you have reached a tipping point, you won the struggle, because Coca-Cola became untouchable on campuses, and then Pepsi became the advertiser for you, a big corporations carrying your message. Right? So similarly, we have to strategize in relation to Palestine. It's not how much impact on Israel it has, but how much you are able to influence the marginal benefits and the marginal returns that are coming from a particular investment. In the US now, for us, in the Arab and Muslim community, we have the boycotting Israeli dates campaign, which when we adopted. So that's an important piece. Dates often are taken by settlements that they run these date farms. They have abusive policies, but also we have alternatives in the United States. We have massive date production in the United States, so we immediately have a replacement for the product for people. So you don't ask them, don't eat dates. Well, I eat dates, so I need an alternative. So immediately you have an alternative and you create that. So you need, as an activist, to think strategically, not only about Israel, but also about how you approach the customer and the person that you want to get them to have a conscious choice, and how to move them to be in that position. So that's how the framing, but I think it has an impact, and I think you could see it from Israeli policies.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
I have three questions.
Can you stand up, please?
I'm Harry Bane of Abdul Hadi for the Muslims. I want three points. One is, do you have heard about the book in Belgium from the Palestine, the last colony, from Lucas Catherine? He's also writing about colonialism in Israel and Palestine. Second question is, many people think about one country. What is the name of the country? And must the Palestinians sing the hymn from Israel? I'm Israeli, yes, I don't understand. The third, I want about BDS. We have activities to stop by supermarkets. One question from the supermarket, why can we not change the Israeli products, go out and buy Palestinian products to sell it to the people as alternative for the Israel street?
Thank you. Allow me to repeat the questions one by one, and I think you can address them. So the first question is, have you heard of the book Palestine, the Last Colony by Lucas Catherine, a Belgian writer?
I haven't seen it, but I'll definitely will take a look at it.
Thank you, Abdelhadi. Thank you. The second one, all right, if you are in favor, I think, of the one-state solution, you propose to have one country. What would be the name of that country? And should the Palestinians sing, for instance, the Israeli anthem?
Yeah.
Well, again, when I say a one-state solution, I am asserting that first we have to go through a decolonization. So it's not a matter of just like one-state solution, so Mr. Netanyahu, now you're the president of everyone. That's not a non-starter. Right? So it has to be a decolonial framing and decolonial trajectory for us to get to that point, and that requires heavy lifting, and I would say there's a lot of heavy lifting that has to be done by Zionism itself, and it has to reconcile its own history relative to being a colonial enterprise that dispossessed a Palestinian indigenous population. So it's after rather than the first step. If we could do that and then get into a debate on the name, that would be the minor debates. I think the bigger debate is whether a decolonial framing can exist and can take place, and the name would actually follow that debate rather than being the first line. As far as the PDS, again, you can bring forth alternative products, but let me give what you call a cautious notion. There's been increasing joint attempts to have joint investments between Palestinians who are affiliated with some aspects of the Palestinian Authority and fuse them into the Israeli economy, so they would be the bridge to undermine the PDS. So and we've seen it today, instead of boycotting Israel, why don't we encourage economic investment and work with the Palestinians to bring him? That is the same framing that we face in the South Africa anti-apartheid movement, including Coca-Cola. And this is what Coca-Cola did. As we began to be successful, Coca-Cola shifted its concession in South Africa to black South Africans and moved the bottling plant into one of the 5 homelands, coming to say that we're investing in black businesses. And now we are seeing some of this increasing in relations to Palestine and Palestinians, so we need to be very cautious of not fusing the PDS movement with a claim or understanding that we want to help the Palestinian economy and see it in essence that they are linked. I would say de-link those and work on the PDS as a PDS with its own principle. And if you want to help the Palestinian economy, help it, but it has to be on the basis of self-determination and independence for that economy. We don't want to create a golden cage, because a golden cage is still a cage, and for the person inside it, it still will be looking at the world through a whole structural oppression that will be multifold. So I very clearly in terms of delineation of how to invest in the Palestinian economy.
Thank you. You already took your third. Let's move on to the next question. Any questions?
Over here.
Hello. My question is, how hopeful are you that there will be a solution in the near future? Because I don't see the signs for a solution in Palestine.
Yeah. Well, I'm very hopeful, even though that it's a very difficult circumstances that we're facing. Again, I do hold a hopeful future. It might not be in the immediate. I think we're looking at a complete transformation in the region, even though that's difficult, but that transformation is occurring. Israel has no option, right? Again, beating up Gaza is not an option. And again, you could continue to think that you could swing your muscles, but I think the world community is no longer have the stomach to see this type of framing. And often the question is that often is thrown at us, that what you're engaged in is in delegitimizing Israel. I said every time Netanyahu acts, he delegitimizes Israel for himself. I don't need to do anything. So in essence, I am hopeful in the sense that there are changes occurring. There are changes taking place. For example, the American Jewish community, Jewish Voice for Peace, American Jewish anti-Zionist network. So there's coalitions that are folding and developing that are also beginning to work from the outside, as well as some of those on the inside, some of the military personnel that is refusing to serve in the Israeli army. So there's fractures in there. It might not be immediate, but I think in the long run we are going to see change, and hopefully it will come faster than our desires in the immediate future.
Thank you. Just before we move on, a small announcement in Arabic. اللي يحب يطرح سؤال باللغة العربية هذا الشيء ممكن، تفضلوا. Okay. نعم. إذا تحب تطرح سؤال يجيك أبو قاسم. صوت حاتم بالعربي كثير حلو. راح تشوفه. Let's move on to the next question. Same in Dutch, by the way. Als je een vraag in het Nederlands wil stellen, dan kan dat. Yeah. Next question. A question from my side, Hatem, if I may. You had a sneak preview of the way your book will be received, I think, in the form of a battle, quite an intense battle that was waged over a course that you sponsored, a student course, a student-led course at UC Berkeley. Can you comment on that, and can you link that to the way you expect this book will be received as well?
Well, again, Palestine is not allowed to have its say independently or without contestation. So colonialism, settler colonialism, also wants to control the narrative. And this is normative in colonial discourses, because you not only want to erase the people, but you want to also erase their history. And that's why in many colonial structures and settler colonial structures, the first often project is to change the names of the topographies. Right? Just think about, we call, Turtle Island is what the Native Americans called the United States. Right? So even the names that are applied relative to settler colonialism and colonial territories, the changes of the name is part of the erasure. Education is, in general, it's also to be transformed. So I'm not surprised that you have anything relative to Palestine is contested by the Zionists and those who are attempting to maintain the Zionist narrative as the dominant hegemonic narrative, and you see that. How the book is going to be received, again, I was in London on Wednesday, and Jeremy Corbyn came the end of the lecture. His wife was there early for the lecture, and the next day we had a massive attack, and it's already firing on Twitter that Jeremy Corbyn is attending the book signing of the founder of SJP, and then calling me anti-Semite and calling Jeremy Corbyn anti-Semite. So you could see that even to the level of that type of contestation is occurring. But we have, again, we have to persevere. The fact that you have what you call an assault or a campaign should not dissuade you from doing what's right and doing what's needed. And these days, anyone who says, I don't like what you're saying, I say, do you have $120? And if say yes, I say, go see a therapist, because I'm not there for you as your therapist, because I'm comfortable with what I'm saying.
Thank you. Next question. We have one in the front, I think, a follow-up. Stand up, please.
Yes, a question about what you're saying now is the decline of the Western powers, and you see a rise of the Eastern powers. What will the effect of this be on this issue itself? Like, will there be some sanctions now because China is more maybe anti-rhetoric about Israel itself?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still the decline of the Western powers and the rise. I am still what you call very hesitant to frame as such. It might be that sometimes we talk our own rhetoric and we believe our own saying. If you just think about the economic underpinning, even though that the West is having economic difficulties, still I think if you look at economic power, it's still vested in the Northern Hemisphere. Massive amounts of resources are coming from the global South to the global North. Even though China is very strong economically and have a manufacturing base, but it controls all of the debt or considerable part of the debt of the Western countries. And as you know, if you owe $100,000 and you can't pay, you're in trouble. But if you owe 10 trillion and you can't pay, the bank is in trouble. So while China is strong, the inability of the northern Western countries, the United States in particular, not to pay, can collapse China. And China likewise can collapse the United States. So they're playing a Russian roulette with each having a gun to the other head. So what we need is to nuance how the new economic order in the world is framed, what are the centers of power, where are the movements in there, and I still think that while the West possibly have lost ground to China, I think the many corners that are celebrating that what they consider to be the weakness, I think that case is still overstated overall.
Quite often in the West, the notion of the international community is raised by, I think, the dominant discourse, by the mainstream basically, and it is said that in the international community, what is happening in Israel and Palestine is controversial. You have a conflict, but can you speak about the position and the views of the actual international community and how this battle is being waged?
Well, we need to define what is the international community. So, is it the 5 permanent powers in the Security Council of the United Nations? If that's one set of community. If you think about the European Union, that's also another set. If you're talking about the Brussels Parliament versus each of the particular foreign policy of the European Union members, that's a different dimensionality. If you're thinking about the people and the populations, which for me are the real international community, that's a different issue altogether. So the problem is that we have mass support for the Palestine cause. That mass support has not translated into effective political mobilization to effect political decision making in each of the particular countries. So the struggle for us right now is how to shift our political work at the local level in order to be reflective on the state priority when it enters into international relations. I think that's a very critical piece, because considerable majorities in European societies and even in the United States, you could actually see among the millennial population, it's almost 47% in terms of support for Palestine. Latin America, massive, massive support for Palestine. Africa is basically from top to bottom, massive support. Is how to translate that popular support into actual political pressure point that will alter the particular foreign policy in Europe with the European Union and with the United States, and I think the United States is going to be the most difficult part, but it is doable moving forward. Even in the most recent election with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, we saw a shift taking place in the Democratic Party. That there was a debate in the platform, the Democratic platform, on the issue of Palestine. There was also debates on the PDS. and at least from Bernie Sanders' appointees to the platform drafting committee, actually Palestine was prominent, was one of the critical issues in there. And among the Democratic Party delegates, there were considerable support for Palestine. And if anything, if we could just see that the move in the US political landscape, I would say the Democratic Party is moving closer to actually having Palestine as part of the platform where the shift, while the Republican Party is being devoured to the extreme right. So we're actually seeing some inroads and some fracture in the consensus among the elites in the United States, and I think that is part of the changes to look forward in relations to the international community. So again, for me, the international community is which part you're speaking about, and then for me, the most valuable part is where the international community as a community, the individuals, and what type of pressures they could mount.
Thank you. Question?
We have a question on the live stream, actually, just came. It says, born as a Dutch citizen, but considering myself as an inhabitant of this planet, most Dutch people don't even know what Al-Nakba is. So when it comes to creating awareness toward the Palestinian case or any other case in this matter, worldwide there is an incredible amount of work to do. Does Professor Hatem Bazian have any ideas or even guideline to create this necessarily awareness among the average citizen?
Thank you.
The question was about that many in the Dutch setting don't know much about the Nakba, and therefore how can you affect change without having knowledge and background in relations to some of the fundamental pieces in relation to Palestine and how to bring about change. Again, I think I take the problem to much larger than only the Nakba. I think we're living in an environment where people are beginning to communicate in 140 characters, right? Twitter and Facebook and so on. And we have a president that just got elected, and basically it's a 140 character type of framing. So we have a challenge of how to cater and to begin to have an impact on a changing medium of communication at the one level. But on the second aspect, having an impact is still the same type of hard work and hard organizing that needs to occur. We can't just put some pieces out and expect people to know about it. Well, it's because it's Palestine. No, it requires some deliberate work and also crafting a particular strategy. So for the example, in the United States, we have American Muslims for Palestine. So the month of May and June, it's usually the month where we do Nakba campaigns. And these are campaigns across many parts of the country, different cities. We have events. In Chicago, we do a flotilla parade in the downtown Chicago to bring awareness and create awareness for the community in relation to that. So that's very important in terms of creating awareness. Another project we have is what you call Adopt a Library project, where we actually have a collection of books, 6 to 8 books on Palestine that we feel are very important, and community members sponsor a library. They get the 8 books and they donate it to their public library. So now you actually have an area where people can access the books in relations to a public library. So that's an important way. It's very easy to undertake and doesn't cost much. And you could empower the local community, because an individual in the local community essentially is making the step of taking the books, walking to their library. Most likely they have to know how the library functions, so they're creating civil society engagement with the local library. And sometimes that actually opens the door to having lectures at the public library, which is very important because it broadens the discussions. Not that we're not thankful for having you on here, but actually expands and begins to have an intersectionality with the public library that opens the doors for other types of engagement as well. So that's very important in terms of providing an interaction with public library. For the young population, we actually developed a magazine with the cartoons type, with the drawing and so on, because you have to address the younger population, because we often, all of our work assumes that the people are at the BA degree. My book is assuming that, but that's a different issue. And therefore, how to affect the kids at a younger age so they will be able to have a basic understanding. So instead of telling them about the world, you create a maze, so they actually will do an art project and they will relate to Palestine in that way. And many of our Nakba campaign or other campaigns, they'll also have art pieces, and as such we'll try to be creative. And if connected to this, we're working right now to develop a curriculum for schools. Especially there's a large number of Muslim schools to begin with, and Arab schools, about 460 of them in the US, to develop something from 8th grade onward that introduces Palestine and mirrors the social science curriculum. So we actually have people that are working on that in order to affect. So how to educate is just not, waving the flag is okay, they possibly have recognition, but there has to be a sustained, what you call strategic thinking of how to affect public opinion relative to Palestine. Lastly, there are many opportunities to relate and be engaged on principle manner in order for Palestine to also be part of the discussion. So we sent a delegation to Standing Rocks to be with the Native Americans. We also had a number of people that went and participated with Black Lives protest and engagement in there. We have a solidarity work with the immigrant mobilization, whether it's in Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, other places, because these all are opportunities to educate and make possible ways to frame and understand how Palestine, so we're not always thinking and acting in our own cubicle. And therefore, we feel that people are not supportive. No, you have to be out there with people in order for people to be with you. But in your own silo, you'll feel isolated. And you think that you're the only one think that way. But when you go out, you'll find that actually many people are engaged. We also, when the Occupy movement was there, actually we were out in the Occupy movement. We held, from a Muslim perspective, we held Friday prayers right in the middle of the Occupy movement in Oakland, California, and we rotated, me, myself, and Imam Zaid. One week, one Friday he went, and another Friday I went. And again, the people are out there. You need to be out there with the people and to be engaged in the struggle, and not to think that you're so unique that people have to come to you. That's just like complete wrong framing altogether.
Thank you. I'm sorry we will not get to you.
Now let him ask the oldest gentleman in our gathering. You
Yeah. I think we need to break, but there's some competition about who is the oldest gentleman in our gathering apparently. But there will be the opportunity to ask the question that you want to ask. We have a longer Q&A session.